Hello, my name is Buddy Childress, and I'm Executive Director of Needles Eye Ministries. We are really happy to have you with us today for our monthly speaker series. We hope you enjoy it. Now it is my treat to introduce our speaker, Haider Sharifi. Many of you know Haider. He has been around Richmond for several years at least. He is a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley Smith Barney. He went to school about 65 miles up the road in Charlottesville. So for those of you who went to school 170 miles from here in Roanoke, you can, or near Roanoke, you can, get together and deal with that. He is, we've had a lot of Hokies speak here as well. Haider has been very active in the community for a long time. For his age, a long time, I should say. He is the president of the UVA Club of Richmond. He has and is a graduate of Richmond Christian Leadership Institute, serves on the Greater Richmond Chamber Council, and it's my pleasure to say that he is an active board member of Needles Eye Ministries and is chairing our Gen X, Gen Y task force, which is really a special thing for us that we have him in that role. Haider was raised in a Muslim family. You'll hear a little bit about that. You'll also hear how his life dramatically changed. So without taking any more time from our speaker today, would you help me welcome Haider Sharifi?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go. We're awake now. So I have an excerpt here from a book that was published several years ago, the Worst Case Scenario Survival book. You might remember it has very helpful insights on worst case scenarios. And I'd like to read one scenario in particular called How to Escape from a Car Hanging Over the Edge of a Cliff. So step one is do not shift your weight or make any sudden movements. Step two is determine how much time you have. So it's very easy to do when you're in a crisis situation. You have to have this book handy. So that includes knowing that if the car is like the majority of cars, a front-wheel drive with the engine in front, this means the bulk of the weight is over the front of the axle. If the rear, then the front is hanging over the edge of the cliff, you probably have more time to climb out. If the front of the car is over the edge, assess your situation. What is the angle of the car? Is it teetering? Does it sway when you shift your weight? If the car is shifting, it is advisable to act quickly. And steps 3 through 6 help you determine whether the front doors, rear doors, or the windows are the best option to escape. But my favorite step of all is step number 7, which is get out as quickly as possible. So I shared that because wouldn't it be nice if we had instruction manuals like this for the different crises in our lives that we experience. And the story I'm going to share to you is about a time when I found myself at the edge of a cliff in my personal life, and I found instructions on how to escape that situation. So let me share a little bit about my history. I was born in Pakistan. My parents were Indian Muslims, and during the partition in 1947, they moved to Pakistan. And from there, they immigrated to the United States in 1981. My mother was a headmistress and a devoted Muslim, and my father was heavily involved in law and politics. They never really pushed religion on me particularly or forced me to become a Muslim, but it's really understood that being from Pakistan meant that you were Muslim. It's who you are. It's not a choice. If you're born there and you look like I do, you're a Muslim. You don't get to choose. So my childhood consisted of following the rules. I followed the rules enough to be called Islamic, and you really are Islamic just because you are. You choose kind of the rules you want to follow. But when I got to college, I decided it was time that I got right with God and became a Muslim. If I was a Muslim, I better be a good Muslim. So I started learning more about the religion, started going to the mosque, learned how to prostrate myself in prayer, joined the Muslim Student Association, participated in Ramadan, just started trying to draw near to God through the things I was doing. And I found that there was really no change at all. It was very empty. I found that I was doing a lot of things, but nothing was happening in here. And I found that the people were really much different than my friends at the frat parties, and some of them weren't really that much nicer. So at that point, I discarded all things religious. Organized religion is, you can have it, throw it out the window. God may still exist, I thought to myself, but he's out there doing his thing. I'm doing my thing. He hasn't done anything for me after all anyway. So it wasn't really relevant, had no impact on my life. So I decided to live the life I wanted to. I wanted to go after the fun and my own existence. That was relevant. So after I graduated UVA, I had intentions of going to medical school, but it took me about 3 years and the full complement of pre-med courses to decide that that was not really what I wanted to do. I wanted to pursue this pipe dream of being a jazz musician in New York. So I decided I'd go to New York after I graduated, but I was in this relationship when I graduated, and the girl's family was from Richmond, so I moved to Richmond and thought to myself that, that'd be fine. I could go to VCU, get a master's education before going to New York. But when I got here, I felt like I was being downgraded because I had DC and I wanted New York, and I got little Richmond. So, I felt when I looked at the city, I felt that it was, 6 blocks long, felt like an alleyway in New York. But over time, it has grown on me. So, but my original perceptions of Richmond weren't very nice, and so that's how I started off my life here in Richmond, and that continued to be compounded by a set of circumstances that really led me to the end of myself, and that included being what I felt unfairly rejected from VCU's master's program, and having no friends, knowing nobody, just finding myself in a situation start to develop that was not very pleasant at all. It was around this time, though, I realized that if I wanted food and shelter, life of a musician was probably not for me. So I decided that I'd get a job, but I was still pretty prideful and arrogant and egotistical, and thought too highly of myself, and thought that I could get any job I wanted to, make CEO in a year, and that'd be great. So I began my job search, confident in my own abilities and talents, and spent over a year and a couple of dead interviews and 1,000 resumes. Found myself hopeless about my future. I was starting to become frustrated, discouraged. I didn't like the city I was in. I wasn't good enough to hack it as a musician. I wasn't capable enough to find a decent job. I had no prospects to become a worthwhile member of society. I had no friends. I knew this girl's family, but that's it. My relationship with my parents was always estranged to that point. So I was losing hope. I was losing hope in the future, and I really felt that I had nothing worth pursuing except this relationship. That was my good thing. That was the one good thing I had. So I started putting my stock into that relationship. And that ended very poorly. So the plan was that myself, this lady, and her brother were going to buy an investment house together. And 2 months before we were supposed to get into the investment house after paying my down payment, the relationship ends. And I find out later that she was having an affair with a married man. And so I just found myself at the end of myself. I was looking over an abyss, seeing nothing worth having, nothing worth living for. And I got to a point where I was willing to take my own life. I remember sitting in an empty apartment, looking around and just thinking, this is my life. This is what I'm seeing in front of me is what's inside of me. And there's nothing I can do about it. And I don't really know how I made it through that evening, except I do remember that I was pretty dehydrated in the morning. I just called out to God. I was at the precipice of my life, and I just called out to God in desperation. I needed Him, and not God of any particular religion. It could have been my left shoe, for all I know. but whoever he was, the God who made the earth, the God who made the trees, the air I breathe, I needed him at that moment, because only he was strong enough, powerful enough to do anything at that moment. And if he didn't answer, then I could take care of business. I could end the striving and the failing and the pain. But I knew if he was there, he's the only one who could do anything about it. So that happened, and I ended up calling a friend of mine that I knew from high school. And I called him up and said, Scott, this is what's going on in my life. I don't know what to do except pray to God. And he said, good, you keep doing that, and go read Psalm 40. And Psalm 40 said, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry, and took me up out of the mud and miry clay, set my foot on the rock, making my footsteps firm. And if there was anyone in the mud and mire, there was anyone in the bog, it was me. And it blew me away. It was a breath of fresh air. How did this know that I was here in that spot? That was the first time I'd ever read the Bible. So I continued to read the Psalms, and I found these guys knew the despair. They knew the hurt. They knew the pain I was going through, but every one of them had a hope that I didn't know. And it was